Game of Thrones is back, Throny Ponies. The 7th season of HBO's epic fantasy is accompanied by unprecedented levels of hype. We're so close to the end. We're flying blind. There are no books to guide us. In addition to becoming one of the most massive hits on television, cable or otherwise, there are quite a few developments from this season the fans of the books have been waiting literally decades to see. Now, if you haven't seen the show and you're thinking about getting into it, or if you want a refresher on where everyone is at this point, who's alive, what's happening, well, we've got you covered in time for this premiere. It's not going to be the most detailed primer ever for seasons 1 through 6, but it'll give you the basic gist along with some key things that we think will probably be important for season 7, all in time so you can go and drink mead with your friends. So let's get the basics out of the way. The premise of Game of Thrones is that it focuses on the fictional continent of Westeros, which is kind of basically medieval England on crack. Westeros used to be 7 separate kingdoms, but now it's united under the Iron Throne thanks to the crazy tyrannical family known as the Targaryens, who conquered everyone with dragons a few hundred years back. A couple decades before the show starts, there's this huge, brutal civil war / rebellion started by Robert of House Baratheon. The aftermath of that civil war unseated the Targaryens from power and almost entirely wiped them out, and gave House Baratheon a tenuous hold over all the kingdoms. Once the show starts, we see that hold unravel very quickly thanks to a number of backstabbing plots. The series itself covers the war that follows as different families vie for control of the Iron Throne, hence Game of Thrones. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of each season, the easiest way to sum up Game of Thrones' huge sprawling conflict is that it centers around 4 separate locations that are all sort of spiraling towards each other over the course of the show. Each one has its notable players, many of whom die sad, brutal deaths. First, the Wall. The most important of these locations, although many of the characters don't necessarily know that yet, is that the Wall and the lands beyond it. The Wall is really a huge capital W wall that blocks off the rest of the kingdom from all the scary magical shit that lives out in the frozen wilds. Things like giants, a haunted forest, and most critically, the White Walkers. Guarding the Wall is the Game of Thrones version of the Coast Guard called the Night's Watch. Pretty crappy job, honestly, so the Night's Watch is mostly made up of the unwanted, criminals, bastards, you know the sort. Facing off against the Night's Watch are the mysterious White Walkers, an army of the dead commanded by the show's big bad, the Night King. Every few thousand years, the White Walkers show up to kill people, turn them into zombies, and bring about super long winters that last for generations. So yeah, all that's happening all over again. That's why one of the show's big mottos is winter is coming, and the motto of House Stark, because while many forget that the White Walkers are more than just a myth, there are a few houses of Westeros that continue to bear that torch. Thanks, Starks! That brings us to the North. The North is the cold, hard land that lies just outside the Wall. Its main caretakers are the Starks, who help govern the North from Winterfell. The Starks make up many of the North's main characters and many of the show's most upsetting red shirts, because the Starks generally, well, they haven't had very good luck. Once the war for the throne kicks off, much of the conflict in the North follows the Starks as they try to hold on to it and the power vacuum that kicks up once House Stark falls. Leading the house is Eddard Stark and his wife Catelyn, along with kids Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon, and bastard son Jon Snow. Each of them's got a magical wolf too, cause gotta have a magical wolf if your emblem's the wolf. They also are the caretakers of the young semi-prisoner Theon of House Greyjoy, who would have been heir to a bunch of angry sailors on the Iron Islands until his dad tried to rebel against the throne. Theon was sent to the Starks as punishment, sort of a hostage against good behavior / legal ward. Now, while we're talking about them, though, we should talk about houses in general. Houses are powerful families in Game of Thrones, basically the nobles that help govern their lands. Each house has a sigil and a slogan, kind of like a sports team. The 4 main houses of the show are the Starks, the Targaryens, the Baratheons, and the Lannisters, although by season 6 most of those are wiped out. Anyway, moving on to the South, which is where the seat of power lies and a whole bunch of the conflict too. The city of King's Landing and the Iron Throne. From here, Robert Baratheon rules, along with Queen Cersei's family, the Lannisters. The Lannisters are both ruthless and super rich, which is just an annoying combination, and they really want the throne for themselves at almost any cost. The main Lannisters are Cersei, the queen, along with her twin brother Jaime, the captain of the Kingsguard, who she happens to be getting it on with, and their imp brother Tyrion. Tyrion is small in stature, but a genius when it comes to politics, so they're sort of forced to keep him around, even though, well, he's kind of a jerk to them. When the war for the Iron Throne really gets going, the show spends a lot of time following plots in and around King's Landing, while House Lannister does what it can to stay in power. However, super far away from the Wall and from King's Landing across the Narrow Sea are the events in Essos. There, the last remaining Targaryens, since King Robert killed all the rest when he took the throne, Daenerys and Viserys are doing what they can to get an army so they can go back to Westeros and claim what's rightfully theirs. Or rather, Viserys is doing what he can to sell Daenerys to someone so that they'll give him an army. Once things really get going, the events across the Narrow Sea center on Daenerys as she becomes the queen she's meant to be and how she's mounting power to head back to Westeros with a bunch of angry ass-kicking dragons. So that'll cover the most important families and where they're operating from for most of the show. So now let's try and break down how it all happens from season to season, starting with Season 1. When the show begins, King Robert is traveling to Winterfell in the north along with Queen Cersei's family, the Lannisters, to offer Eddard Stark the job of his chief advisor. Robert's offering Eddard, aka Ned, the job because, well, his previous hand, Jon Arryn, was just killed. Arryn also happens to be Catelyn Stark's cousin, and she thinks the Lannisters had something to do with it. Meanwhile, the youngest Stark boy, Bran, spies Queen Cersei and her twin brother Jaime making out, so they push him out a window. As you do, and the fall paralyzes him. And that's just the first episode. Ned reluctantly heads to King's Landing along with his two daughters, Sansa and Arya, while bastard Jon Snow heads north to the Wall to join the Night's Watch, which is about the most noble thing he can do since he's not allowed to inherit any of the Stark's lands. Once in King's Landing, Ned discovers that none of Cersei's children, Joffrey, Myrcella, or Tommen, actually belong to Robert. They're actually the byproduct of brother-sister incest with Jaime. Following an attempt on the now paralyzed Bran's life, Catelyn Stark decides to go to King's Landing to warn Ned about the Lannisters because the knife used, that was Tyrion's. On the way, she runs into Jaime and Cersei's imp brother, who else? Tyrion, and takes him prisoner. Catelyn then takes Tyrion with her to her sister's place in the Vale, where she tries him for the murder attempt on Bran, but he's acquitted because he wins a trial by combat with the help of a shady sellsword named Bronn. Back at King's Landing, King Robert is killed in a hunting accident, but before he dies, he names Ned Protector of the Realm. Ned sends a letter to Stannis, Robert's brother, saying basically, hey dude, Robert doesn't actually have any rightful heirs, so that makes you the king. But Cersei's not exactly happy with that. She says, my little shit of a son, Joffrey, is the king, and she has Ned executed for treason. Yep, main character dies, first season. It's very exciting stuff. Ned's daughter, Sansa, who was pledged to marry Joffrey, is then taken captive or hostage, essentially, while his other daughter, Arya, gets away. The North, of course, gets pissed off about Ned getting killed and breaks away from Westeros and names Robb Stark, Ned's oldest son, King of the North. Robert's brothers Stannis and Renly also both declare for the throne, and a giant civil war begins. Now, while all this was going on, young Daenerys Targaryen and her brother Viserys are exiled from Westeros in the continent of Essos to the east. There, they hook up with the Dothraki, a bunch of buff horse-riding warriors with ponytails. Daenerys marries their leader called Drogo, who likes rough sex, but he hates her brother, who's a jerk. Drogo ends up killing Viserys and impregnating Daenerys. So close to happily ever after, but she loses the baby and Drogo also dies after getting a nasty infection. Daenerys burns his body along with an evil witch who is responsible for both of those terrible things and 3 dragon eggs that were given to her as a wedding gift and maybe Targaryen family heirlooms. Daenerys walks into the fire, the eggs hatch, everyone freaks out because holy shit, dragons are back, you guys. And then we move on to season 2, where the war begins. Stannis Baratheon swears allegiance to the pyromaniac priestess Melisandre, and he announces publicly that he's the rightful king and reveals Joffrey's true origin as the weird incest baby. Meanwhile, Robb Stark is marching south towards the Lannisters and racking up a string of wins. During one of those battles, he takes Jaime Lannister prisoner. Robb sends word to the Lannisters like, hey, we can make peace if you let the North break away and give me back my sister Sansa. The Lannisters tell him to fuck off. Meanwhile, Catelyn Stark, Robb's mother, shows up at the camp of Renly Baratheon to try and form an alliance. While she's there, Stannis has Melisandre sneak into the camp. She gives birth to a demon baby who murders Renly. Catelyn and Renly's bodyguard Brienne of Tarth are accused of the murder, and so they run away. When she hooks back up with her son, she decides to free Jaime in the hopes that the gesture will convince Jaime to free her daughter when he makes it back to King's Landing. Brienne goes with him to ensure it gets done. Robb's pissed, but kind of goofs up himself. He has promised to marry a daughter of House Frey, who are an important family they're allied with, but he's actually in love with a lady named Talisa instead. That sounds inconsequential, but just wait, it's super important. In the south, Arya has escaped King's Landing after her dad's execution. She gets taken prisoner by the Lannisters, who don't know who she is, but ends up escaping again. She also saves a caged prisoner named Jaqen H'ghar, who turns out to be a magical ninja assassin. So that's awesome. In exchange for busting him loose, he offers to kill any 3 people she wants. But let's jump back up to the north for a minute, because there's a lot going on. While Robb Stark's away, Theon Greyjoy, who grew up with the Starks but is actually from the family of angry sailors who rule the Iron Islands, sneaks back into Winterfell and captures it for his own. The last 2 remaining Stark children, Bran and Rickon, who were left behind at Winterfell while their brother Robb went off to war, escape with the help of some wildlings. Wanting to save face, Theon pretends to execute them using stand-in children, which is still a really dick move. Meanwhile, Stannis Baratheon organizes a huge army to attack King's Landing, but Tyrion, who is Hand of the King at this point, manages to successfully defend it by burning most of Stannis' ships with wildfire. The attack on King's Landing fails and Stannis retreats, but most of the credit goes to Tyrion's dad, Tywin. There's some bad blood there. Up at the Wall, Jon Snow is scouting the wilds because of some weird stuff going on with the wildlings. He hooks up with a hot wildling redhead named Ygritte, who negs him a lot and gets him captured by her comrades. He ends up joining with the wildlings so he can spy on them after he gains their trust by killing a legendary Night's Watch dude named Qhorin Halfhand who, well, he told him to do it. And across the sea, Daenerys leads what remains of her ragtag group out of the Red Waste and into the prosperous city of Qarth, where a rich lord named Daxos proposes to marry her and use his money to help return it to Westeros and conquer it. When Daxos betrays her for her dragons, she locks him in a vault and basically says, all your money's mine now. Wow, and that brings us all the way up to the beginning of season 3, where after the defeat of Stannis Baratheon, the Lannisters consolidate their hold on the Iron Throne. A part of that includes marrying Sansa to Tyrion instead of King Joffrey and setting Joffrey up to marry another powerful family called the Tyrells. Jaime Lannister and Brienne are on their way back to King's Landing when they're attacked by Bolton's soldiers who capture them and cut off Jaime's sword hand. Meanwhile, Jon Snow swears allegiance to the wildlings. They go south to attack the Wall while the Night's Watch is undermanned. Oh, and in Winterfell, Theon Greyjoy's been betrayed himself and taken captive by an unknown dude who is torturing the shit out of him. Back east, Daenerys Targaryen agrees to buy 8,000 super soldiers known as the Unsullied in exchange for one of her dragons. After making the deal though, she orders the Unsullied to kill their former masters and she gets her dragon back and frees the Unsullied who decide to follow her. So that was a smart move. Things aren't going that well for the Starks though, who've lost the support of Walder Frey, who's upset that Robb married Talisa instead of one of his daughters like they planned. Robb agrees to ally with the Freys and, as a sign of good faith, to marry his uncle Edmure to Walder Frey's daughter. But once the wedding begins, Frey's man, along with the help of the traitorous former Stark ally Roose Bolton, attacks the Starks, kills Robb and Catelyn Stark, and, well, basically everyone you care about on that side of the show. This is called the Red Wedding, and it's what everyone always freaks out about. Arya Stark shows up, but she's knocked out and taken to safety by the Hound, Joffrey's former bodyguard. Oh yeah, we haven't really mentioned him yet, but that's who he is. As a reward for the massacre, Tywin Lannister names Bolton the Ward of the North. Oh, and that dude who was torturing Theon Greyjoy? Yeah, that was Roose's bastard son Ramsay, and he runs Winterfell now. Wow, that was a quick moving season. On to season 4. Well, we've got another bad wedding. During King Joffrey and Margaery Tyrell's ceremony, Joffrey drinks poisoned wine and and dies. Cersei blames her brother Tyrion for the death and has him arrested. Sansa Stark is smuggled out of King's Landing by Peter Baelish, aka Littlefinger, who's had a long-time thing for her mother and also sort of set her dad up to die. He tells Sansa that he was involved in Joffrey's death. In the east, Daenerys has already conquered a number of cities and is laying siege to another huge slave city, Meereen. She captures it, frees the slaves, and nails 163 slave masters to post because she's not having it. She learns that previous cities have fallen back into their old slaving ways, so she decides to hold off on her invasion of Westeros in order to bring justice to the areas she already rules. She wants to be a good queen. Jaime sends Brienne on a mission to find and protect Sansa and gives her his sword before he heads back to King's Landing. Meanwhile, Tommen, Joffrey's youngest brother, is crowned the new king of Westeros. Sansa and Littlefinger flee to the Eyrie in the Vale, where Sansa's Aunt Lysa Arryn and her creepy 10 or 11-year-old breastfeeding son Robin live. That's when we learn that Littlefinger and Lysa were the ones who originally conspired to kill Jon Arryn, not the Lannisters, which was the event that basically set the whole war off in the first place. Some more backstabbing happens here by Littlefinger, which leads to Lysa getting killed, and Littlefinger is now in charge of the Eyrie. Tyrion stands trial for the murder of Joffrey. Everyone testifies against him, including his mistress Shae. We thought they were in love. Tyrion again demands trial by combat. Cersei names the Mountain a giant dude and the Hound's older brother as her champion. For his fighter, Tyrion names Oberyn Martell, a Prince of Dorne who's come to King's Landing to take revenge on the Lannisters for his sister's death back during the war with the Targaryens. Doesn't work out so well for Tyrion this time. Martell gets killed and Tyrion is sentenced to death. He's later released from jail by Jaime on the down low. He then finds his lover, Shae, in bed with his dad, Tywin, and proceeds to, well, strangle her and shoot a crossbow bolt through his dad on the toilet. Up north, the wildlings mass to attack the wall. Jon Snow rejoins and is able to warn the Night's Watch about this. There's a huge fight involving giants and everything's going to hell until Jon Snow takes charge. During the fight, his lover Ygritte is killed, the wildlings are defeated and retreat. Jon goes north beyond the wall to find their leader, Mance Rayder, but they're overrun by the remainder of Stannis' army, who take Mance prisoner. Also, up north, Bran Stark, not dead, follows some weird dreams to meet a three-eyed raven who's a part old man, part all-seeing tree person, and that's the big finale. But to start off season 5, there's an all-out manhunt for Tyrion, who's fleeing to the east to meet up with Daenerys. While fleeing, Tyrion is captured by Jorah Mormont, who was a former advisor for Daenerys, but she expelled him after she realized that he was totally in love with her and actually a spy for the Lannisters. Mormont leads Tyrion back to Daenerys, hoping to win back her favor. They end up getting captured by slavers and taken to the fighting pits, where Daenerys happens to be visiting. Mormont beats the other fighters and reveals his identity to Daenerys, as well as his gift to her, Tyrion. Tyrion convinces Daenerys to spare Mormont's life and she exiles him again. Tyrion joins Daenerys' Council of Advisors. Back at the Wall, Jon is elected new Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Following the death of the previous Lord Commander, he immediately pisses off a bunch of the old-timers by allying with the remaining wildlings who are fleeing from the White Walkers. Also at the Wall, Stannis gets pissed off that nobody will help him even though he saved everyone's asses. He burns Wildling King Mance Rayder because he won't submit to him, and then decides to march for Winterfell, where Roose Bolton is now Warden of the North. It also happens to be where Littlefinger and Sansa are headed next. Littlefinger marries her off to the crazy dude Ramsay Bolton, who's been torturing Theon for the past couple of seasons. It's not a happy marriage. Theon eventually comes around and helps Sansa escape Winterfell. And all this goes down right as Stannis' army arrives. On the way to Winterfell, they fell on hard times. Stannis decided to sacrifice his daughter Shireen by burning her at the stake, thinking it would help Melisandre's magic. It doesn't really help because Stannis' army is destroyed by Bolton's forces. Stannis himself is killed by Brienne, who's still out there trying to find and help Sansa. Arya flees Westeros and arrives in the eastern city of Braavos to meet up with her old murdering buddy, Jaqen H'ghar, who runs the magical ninja assassin cult called the Faceless Men. Arya starts training with them because, well, let's face it, they're badass and it's what we always wanted for her. Jaime Lannister heads to Dorne to retrieve Myrcella, another one of their incest kids, who's been pledged to marry Prince Doran Martell's son, only now they're kind of worried she's a prisoner on account of them killing Oberyn Martell during Tyrion's trial. Whoops. After a, well, really boring subplot, Jaime is allowed to return to King's Landing with Myrcella, but she's poisoned by Ellaria Sand, the former lover of Oberyn Martell who wanted revenge, and she dies. Meanwhile, Tommen, the only remaining child, is now king and is married to Margaery Tyrell, who convinces him to send his mother Cersei away. But Cersei fights back by arming a religious order named the Sparrows, who arrest Loras, Margaery's brother, on charges of homosexuality. Cersei is all happy about this until it backfires because the High Sparrow also arrests her for incest. Cersei confesses and is forced to walk through the streets naked as punishment, and there she begins plotting some epic revenge. Back at the Wall, Jon Snow squares off against a huge army of the undead in a ridiculously awesome battle where he sees the dreaded Night King. Afterwards, there's a big mutiny among the Night's Watch, and Jon Snow gets stabbed several times. He died doing the right thing, just like his dad. And that's where they ended the season. But fortunately, we had another season after that, season 6. So after she escapes from Winterfell, Sansa Stark heads to the Wall to find her brother Jon, while Theon Greyjoy goes back to the Iron Islands. Back in Winterfell, Ramsay goes full loco, kills his father, Roose Bolton, as well as his father's wife and his newborn half-brother. Seriously, this guy's got problems. At the Wall, Jon Snow is brought back to life by Melisandre and is reunited with Sansa. She convinces Jon to gather an army and march on Winterfell. Then, after a long battle, Jon Snow's army defeats Ramsay Bolton with help from Littlefinger, who shows up just in the nick of time with the army he borrowed from the Eyrie. Sansa feeds Ramsay to his own dogs, which is actually a pretty sweet move, and Jon Snow is proclaimed the new King in the North. Speaking of Jon Snow, Bran Stark sort of learns in a vision that he's not actually Ned Stark's bastard, but the son of, get this, Lyanna Stark, Ned's sister, and Rhaegar Targaryen, a brother of Daenerys who is now dead. And that kind of makes Jon Snow an heir to the throne, just like Daenerys. Also, paid off a fan theory years in the making, yes! Back at King's Landing, Cersei's big revenge plot comes to fruition. This is crazy. Cersei uses wildfire to blow up the Great Sept, which kills the High Sparrow, Margaery, Loras, Lancel, her cousin, who ended up hooking up with the Sparrows, and a bunch of others all at once right before her big trial. Tommen, who is grief-stricken after Margaery's death, kills himself by jumping out of a window. Cersei is then crowned the new Queen of Westeros, and you don't want to mess with her. Meanwhile, Jaime Lannister takes the Tully family castle at Riverrun and forces Edmure Tully to surrender. Jaime also kills Catelyn Stark's brother, the Blackfish. He returns to the Twins, where Walder Frey celebrates the victory, but he is killed by Arya Stark, who's now returned to Westeros. She's a badass and she's got a grudge. In the east, Daenerys, who's flown off on one of her dragons during a rebellion in Meereen, is captured by Khal Moro, who takes her before the heads of the Dothraki. She burns them alive with the help of her dragons to make a point. She returns to Meereen and uses her dragons to defeat the remaining slavers who oppose her, puts her in a pretty good position. Theon and his sister Yara Greyjoy show up and also pledge their allegiance to her. So in the end of the season, this is where we're up to right now. We see Daenerys sailing for Westeros to presumably begin her long-awaited invasion. So here's where we're at. Leading into season 7, we've got Jon Snow as King of the North and possibly heir apparent to the Iron Throne itself. We've got Cersei on the Iron Throne, who's gonna have to manage against not only him, but also Daenerys, who's coming with Tyrion, some hardcore vengeance, and most importantly, dragons. And all of them are gonna have to deal with the looming threat of the Night King and the White Walkers at some point. All right, that about does it for our primer on everything Game of Thrones. You are ready for season 7. Let us know what you're excited about in the next season in the comments down below. Also, we've got 2 big things that we need to take care of before the end of the series. We have 1, the war against the White Walkers, 2, the war to settle the Iron Throne. Do you think one of those is going to be resolved this season so they can tackle the next one next season? Let us know which one you want them to address first in the comments down below. I don't know that it's gonna change much because it's already been shot and it's gonna be coming, but let's make some predictions anyway. And to make sure you get updates on every single episode of Game of Thrones for the next couple of months, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the Know. We're thinking of, what should we, I don't know, should we talk about it? Sure, let's talk about it. You know what? Fuck it. Every Monday during Game of Thrones, we're gonna sit down for like an hour after the episodes and we're just gonna nerd out about them with you guys. It's gonna be fun times, right? Yes, that's right. It's gonna be so fun.